My name is Earls. I'm not a Navy sailor. I don't even play one on TV, but I do write about naval things, and I wanted to share this interest with you folks. I had no idea that I would be surrounded by pretty much all Navy people, including a Marine Corps gentleman and a young lady whose dad served on the Lamson, so I'm going to force her to get up here and tell all the stories. But anyway, that's a great honor. I'm thrilled that you're here. Okay, let me get through the first part of this and we'll get going. I was expecting a crowd of non-Navy people, so some of this stuff you probably already know. I'll go through that pretty quickly. I'll try to talk a bit about Lamson and her sisters, the general situation of World War II, what happened to the crew, a little bit about what happened to my dad's cousin, who was my inspiration for writing this, who was on the ship. Again, you guys probably know a lot of this, but for people who don't, way back in the good old days, around the time of the Revolution, there were small ships of various kinds, corvettes, gunboats, frigates were sort of mid-sized, and then ships of the line like that one there. I think that might be the famous HMS Victory. Then in the 19th century, there was this really rapid evolution over a period of 100 years as we got steam, and people developed enough iron to put it on ships to protect them. So you had over there on the left things like the Monitor and Merrimack, the famous battleship Maine that got blown up, which started the Spanish-American War, and the father, I guess. No, there's a connection to the Sound of Music. Mr. Whitehead invented the self-propelled torpedo in 1866, which led to the creation of torpedo boats and later submarines. And something had to be developed to protect bigger ships against those little torpedo boats, so they built something called the torpedo boat destroyer, which later became just a destroyer, which ended up taking over some of the jobs of the small torpedo boat, but had more armament, so it could do multiple things. So by the time you get to World War I and World War II, you have destroyers of several hundred to maybe even sometimes 2,000 tons, cruisers of 5, 10, 15,000 tons, sort of a mid-sized role, like the frigates of yesteryear, and battleships of 25 to 75,000 tons, depending on when they were built, and of course aircraft carriers later on. And the destroyer, as all of you guys know, did all the grunt work, protected everybody, did everything nobody else wanted to do or could do. The Mayhem class, okay, I guess that's the name of this class. I should have known this. Is that right? Yeah, okay. 350 feet long, roughly 1,500 tons, 46,000 shaft horsepower. They did better than 37 knots on trials, but that's in service speed was something like 37 knots. 12 21-inch torpedo tubes and 5 5-inch guns made it a pretty deadly and fast ship. These are all the ships. These two here, Drayton and Lamson, were built at Bath Iron Works. The others were built elsewhere, so they're there's a bit of a local angle with those two ships. And there's a picture of Bath Iron Works back in the day, and Lamson shortly after being launched. And they even had commemorative envelopes for shakedown cruise back then. I don't know if they did that in your era, but I guess it was considered important enough to do it earlier on. Okay, the Lamson's in service. One of the first things it gets to do is accompany Lexington, and they go looking for Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan out in the South Pacific. They were the ships on scene. They established a search pattern. Most of it was probably done by the air crews, but the Lamson had a role in that. And there's a Lexington about that time, maybe a little bit earlier. And there's the Lamson, looking pretty happy. Pre-war times. Norfolk was probably not a bad place to have duty, and the thing looks pretty darn ship-shape. Okay, this is my motivation for writing about this originally. Lots of ships I could have picked, but this gentleman, Martin Earls, grew up in Southbridge, where my dad's from, South Central Massachusetts. Not much of a warrior, at least not then. He graduated from Holy Cross in 32 or 33, I think, and majored in English. Promptly became an English teacher in Southbridge, and I think he thought that's what he was going to do for the rest of his life. But as you know, people make plans and then other things happen. As our friend was mentioning, her dad, who served on the Lamson in this time, even late in life, when he was if you don't mind me saying, suffering from dementia.
Yeah.
One of his mantras was 2 days out of Pearl, 2 days out of Pearl. They were out of Pearl escorting the Lexington and I think the Enterprise taking ships to Midway or Wake Island when the Japanese struck. So the Lamson and the carriers escaped, which had because the carriers escaped, that had an enormous impact on the war because the U.S. Navy was still up and fighting. This is a diagram of the harbor. You can't quite make out the individual ships, but all of those ships that are over there on the left are sister ships of the Lamson, and the three marks with the red explosion pattern were very badly damaged. I think one of them may have even been scrapped ultimately. So Lamson and company escaped their fate because they were out at sea with Drayton. Okay, this is Martin, not too long after the war, probably early 42, and he's no longer teaching English and reading, Shakespeare, reciting poems. He's a Navy man. If you had a college education, which he did, they usually turned you into an officer one way or the other, because if nothing else, they knew you could master paperwork and bureaucracy without getting in a fight over it. And presumably he had other qualities too, I would imagine. I'm not teasing or making fun of him, but that's the Navy put people in slots where they thought they could be most useful. These are more typical members of the crew. I don't know if you see guys like that much around anymore. I wouldn't want to mess with them. They look like real guys with no messing. So Lamson stayed lucky. I don't know if the Lamson is known as the Lucky Lamson to everyone, but the one or two crew members I spoke with in gathering material for this book, primarily diaries that they shared, said that was kind of its nickname because, by and large, most of the time, it stayed pretty lucky. So in 42, it was doing mostly escorts, I guess, probably from Pearl or thereabouts down to the South Pacific to resupply Australia and the ships that were sort of holding the line against the continued expansion of Japanese forces at that time. For those of you who might not be up to date on it, but probably most of you are, after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese almost immediately attacked the Philippines, British and Dutch colonies in Southeast Asia, and in matters of months they expanded to take over almost the whole Pacific. They were actually threatening Australia, and they were even considering invasion, although it was a little bit on the far horizon. So Lamson was lucky there, but not quite so lucky. Still lucky, but not quite so. After doing some convoy duty, Lamson was attached to Task Force 67, which had been sent to intercept Japanese ships coming down the famous slot in the Solomon Islands, so-called, between the island chains leading to Guadalcanal. This was at a point in the war where the United States was putting almost all its resources into Europe, supporting the British and getting ready to invade North Africa and sort of putting the Pacific on hold. But they saw this threat to Australia, so they were committing more and more ships. But the whole campaign, the Japanese didn't really have enough to totally dominate, and the Americans didn't. So it was a seesaw campaign on land in Guadalcanal, where the Marines went there and burned themselves out, and the Army came in to reinforce them. The Japanese were constantly bringing in fresh troops and supplies when they could. In any case, in one such, let me see if I have a map further on. No, I don't. I thought I had a map of the whole region, but in any case, one of these missions to intercept the nightly run of the Japanese reinforcements, usually escorted by big ships with maybe landing barges or some merchant ships coming along, consisted of 4 heavy cruisers with big 8-inch guns, and 3 light cruisers, and 4 destroyers, 2 being the Lamson and Drayton, I think, who just arrived. But wisely, the commander recognized he hadn't had a chance to sit with the commanding officers of Drayton and the other late arrival, so he told them to stay back a few miles because they didn't know what the battle plan was, and that turned out to be Lamson's good luck. They ran into a force of 8 Japanese destroyers. Now it sounds unequal at first glance, all those guns against those destroyers, but at this point in time, the Japanese had been training all through the interwar years for night fighting. They were experts at it. And this was just at the dawn of radar. I think the Americans probably had some early radar sets, but you couldn't count on them 100%. And also the Japanese were in a better position because it's nighttime. They came in from that side with the land behind them, so it's hard to see the silhouettes. And meanwhile, the Americans came sailing up the middle happily, looking for trouble. And unfortunately, they found it. And trouble from Japanese destroyers was a serious thing. During the interwar years, the Japanese had developed a so-called long lance torpedo, which was about a few inches bigger in diameter than any other torpedo in the world. It was powered by an oxygen engine. I can't really describe it technically, but it resulted in torpedoes that were very, very fast and had a very long range, 2 or 3 times the range of anybody else's torpedoes. So when someone would get hit by these, they would think they'd hit a mine. They couldn't imagine that a ship on the horizon virtually had been able to torpedo them. But that's what happened. 2 heavies had their bows almost completely blown off. I believe the New Orleans was actually scrapped because it was so badly damaged. They lost the whole first turret, turret A, and turret B. Most of the people in it probably didn't make it. Minneapolis, almost as bad, but they were repaired. And the Japanese only lost 1 destroyer in that one. And in this Seasar area, as reference, this is the same general area where future President John Kennedy was doing his torpedo boat patrol work, and where his inadvertency got his ship cut in half by a Japanese destroyer, and also where the famous Sullivan brothers, 5 brothers on one ship, the USS Helena, were all killed when that ship was sunk in a similar encounter. This area around Savo Island was infamously nicknamed Iron Bottom Sound because so many ships, American and Japanese, were sunk there at this kind of intersection where people were trying to get to Guadalcanal over a course of about six months or a year. It was a really intense period of naval combat. And I think it's called by Tassafaronga, I think it's sometimes called the Third Battle of Savo Island or something because so much of import happened in this area. But Lamson, not a scratch. Good for Lamson. Lamson did some more convoy patrols, then as Guadalcanal was secured and his forces began to move west toward New Guinea. They got involved in some bombardment work until early '44 and returned to Mare Island in San Francisco and got a snazzy new paint job and, generally fixed up and all that jazz. And you can see here, I don't have a comparison photo, but I think they got rid of one of the aft 5-inch mounts and added 4 dual 20mm or 40mm anti-aircraft guns, which they were going to need because that was the trend in action at the time. So again, we have this kind of overview of what was happening in the war. They had been down here helping out Guadalcanal and out toward New Guinea. That campaign continued, and meantime across the Central Pacific, the Nimitz's carriers were gradually picking off Japanese fleets, taking some islands, and then the phone rang. Sorry about that. So, everyone remembers, I think, General MacArthur dug to his tractors, getting spirited away from the Philippines when the Americans were being defeated there at the start of the war in 41-42. And he was determined to get on back there. To some extent for really good strategic reasons. The hope was that if you control this, you could prevent the Japanese getting any supplies from where the oil came from, and you'd also be in a position to attack Japan and its possessions in China. And of course there was a certain amount of ego, but probably most importantly there were a whole lot of American POWs, and he wanted to try to rescue them. So, everybody with me? If you guys want to get up here and run circles around me, you can, because I'm just the amateur here. I've read about the Battle of Leyte Gulf and its surrounds a million times. It's really hard to follow because it's very complicated. It's usually considered the biggest naval battle of all times in terms of the number of ships, the size of the ships, and the complexity of the action. It actually involves a number of separate major actions and innumerable smaller actions. Briefly, the Americans wanted to land on Luzon, which I think is there. The main islands to establish a base. It was an invasion roughly almost on the same scale as D-Day in Europe, although the opposition on the ground was less well established. And the main American fleet came in to support that. Meanwhile, the Japanese saw this coming, They had a lot of trouble because the American submarines had been cutting off their oil. They barely had enough oil to operate their fleet, and they had very a reduced number of ships. And in a previous battle, infamously known as the Marianas Turkey Shoot, several hundred of their planes had been destroyed by American planes in air combat, so they were short of air crews, short of airplanes. But Americans didn't know that. So one part of their mission, which isn't very well reflected in this map, was they sent a fleet of their carriers nearby and then kind of went away, kind of like, if you're a hunter, the mama bird goes off to distract you so you won't see the nest. That was what they did. And Admiral Halsey, an otherwise virtuous fellow, thought he was finally going to get those damn carriers and end the war. He went chasing them. Meanwhile, a substantial fleet of battleships, including the Yamato, at the time one of the two biggest battleships in the world, came down from the north to attack Leyte. And there was nothing there except a small screen of destroyers, the famous Battle of the Tin Cans, Taffy 3, yeah. And out of the blue, this huge fleet showed up, and the destroyers put up a short story, such a stiff resistance that the Japanese eventually lost their nerve and turned back. But they were within a few miles of getting to the landing zone, and if they had, it would have gone all over. And then, another force of Japanese battleships was coming up through here. I think because the U.S. had probably intercepted the code, they knew exactly where they were coming, so they ambushed them with planes, destroyers, submarines, and then finally battleships, including several salvaged from Pearl Harbor, who had their revenge. And they were pretty well thoroughly defeated. I think not all of them, but most of them were sunk. So, during this time period, the Japanese also realized they were in big trouble, and they didn't have that many resources left, so they began to ask for volunteers for their special squadrons, otherwise known as kamikazes. And for the first time, Americans were exposed to a humanly guided missile, and the results were, the odds weren't great, but they were very destructive. They did tremendous damage immediately. Okay, the naval battles, roughly speaking, won. The armies ashore, but the Japanese are putting up a fierce fight, and they're bringing in supplies from these other islands to Leyte. So, there's Doug. A lot of the supplies are coming into this place called Ormoc Bay. So the order went out, get some troops in there, secure it, and have some tin cans escort them. This is the Lamson fire in support of the landing, and that's December 6 or 7. I think it's December 7 actually. You can see that, I don't know where the photo of the first wave went, but this is the second wave heading into Ormoc Bay. The landings were successful, but then those kamikazes showed up, and life got really, really interesting and really terrifying for American sailors. One of the first to be hit was this landing ship, mechanized, a big, mostly open ship. The LSTs had a deck, the LSM not so much, I think. I'm not sure if that would survive, but obviously very badly damaged. The APD Ward. The APDs at the time were, I believe, conversions of destroyer escorts, basically destroyer-sized vessels, a little bit slower, and they turned them into fast transports for places where they needed to get men, supplies, somewhere quickly, with some ability to defend itself, but in this case, it couldn't defend itself successfully against the kamikazes. USS Ward, afire and damaged, and the same, and then it was the Lamson's turn. And maybe I should read just a little bit of the account by Stan Licklider, who was very kind to share this with me. The afternoon of December 7th was landing successful. Lamson provided AA and shore fire. We've been dogged since daylight when the landing started. I was ready for some fresh air, so I called Amsler, one of the repair party electricians, to come down and relieve me. Licklider was an electrician. I got topside just as a twin-engine bomber swept in from the starboard side astern. The guns were making a hell of a racket, and the CO was twisting to bring everything to bear when a 40mm round took out the plane's right engine and dropped a bomb off the stern and wheeled into the sea. I could see the two men in the cockpit as it went by. I had been caught in a stampede as the repair party ran from the stern, and I vowed to go aft if they went forward to stay out of the way for the next time. A few minutes later, Val, piloted by another kamikaze pilot, Val is, I think, a small bomber, single engine, I think. Kamikaze pilot really knew how to fly, came in from astern with guns blazing. I headed forward along the port side as bullets went into the water to my left, causing me to hit the deck and roll in under the uptakes of number 2 fire room. Another member of the repair party landed on my back just as the plane hit the superstructure and exploded. We both got up shaky and scared as hell. I went back to the shop after taking a quick look at the carnage just forward with blower shield. The forward repair party, the people from fire room had taken bomb fragments and nobody was moving. I did not investigate further and figured everyone was dead. I was badly shaken and headed for the electrical shop to get oriented again. I could see that people were going over the side, and I had no idea what the situation was. Hibbard was not around, having gone over the side, and in fact, the midship was deserted. I could feel the ship slow down and noticed that the guns had been put out of action aft, and everything was very quiet, with the exception of the noise of the fire. The number 2 stack was plugged by the wing, where he hit first, and the water tender had shut the boilers down at the first hint of the flare back. We were almost dead in the water by the time I got to the shop. People were going over the side. I took off the heavy army shoes that had been issued and went to the starboard rail outboard of the shop, where Sivkovich was looking down at the water. We couldn't bring ourselves to dive in despite the numbers already in the water. Lamson was on an even keel and burning above the galley passage, but seemed to be a safe haven for the moment. There were people in the forecastle heaving ammunition over, and some were on the fantails of the wounded. So I put my shoes back on and dropped into the engine room and lit off the emergency diesel and put power on the submersible pump outlets on the main deck so we could get some water on the fire above the fuel tanks in the galley passage. Nobby Walsh came up to help me with a pump, which we dropped over, hoping to attack the fire on the galley passage and keep it away from the fuel tanks. The pump ran for a short time and then shorted out and blew the main board offline. I started the process again with another pump and the same thing happened, so we gave up. Captain Noel had gone overboard in a perfect swan dive from the bridge because of the flames around the bridge, and he was picked up by the flusser and persuaded the Commodore not to sink the ship, which you would often do if the ship was not going to be repairable. You pull everybody off and sink it. So the tugger was been ordered to our rescue. Meanwhile, that's the tug. Meanwhile, Nobby and I had experienced frustration. We were called back to the fantail. The ATF came up and stage went over. The wounded had been transferred, and we walked from Lamson to the tug. I joined a real crowd of survivors that was herded below and out of the way of the small gun crew. Lieutenant Hicksonbow and a line handling party in Close's boat were able to get a line to the bow, and Lamson was taken in tow as Japanese air attacks continued. It was a very shaky experience being packed below while that little 3-inch popped away topside. I won't read more, but you get the idea. They did ultimately bring the ship back. Many of these men ended up in the hospital ship for a while. And they patched up the Lamson enough to try to take it back to, Puget Sound Naval Base, which is a long haul. And obviously not all the crew went, they just needed a skeleton crew. Many men were wounded or transferred. Stan Licklider, the gentleman whose diary was shared with me, was one of them. Fortunately, he lived in that general vicinity, like he's from Washington, so getting back there, he was able to visit his folks, which was a big thing. And you can see some of the damage in these after-action photos. It's hard to say, we'll see what they are, but lots and lots of twisted metal, gun mounts blown off, torpedo director blown off. Yeah, we'll get to there yet. My dad's cousin completed this trip. Again, those of us who are his not descendants directly, but from his family, don't quite know what the story was. His nephew on his wife's side is a Navy guy. He spent a few tours of duty in the Med in 57, 58 or something, and he used to go fishing with Martin when he was a boy. We get lots of yarns about secret missions and all these other things, which he's concluded as an adult were probably just yarns. All the time he took them seriously. I don't know what happened. I think Martin communicated the idea that he was running the ship back to Puget because the captain had fallen apart and it was kind of shaky, but it may have been the other way around. But regardless, it was rough for all these guys, and you cannot fault anybody for having trouble dealing with it. His late wife, who passed away a year or two ago, said, all of Martin's problems came from this time. Probably didn't talk about it much, but he was able to come home and be a pretty successful guy. He went into business. He started a company called Wachusett Tank. I'm not quite sure what it did, but it was located in this vicinity. Lived in Lunenburg, later in Lamson after he was older. And contributed to society and all that stuff, but he clearly carried a lot of burden from this time period. Later in the war, he was put in, I think he went to the University of North Carolina, was teaching, maybe an officer candidate school or something, teaching officer skills or what have you. So, here we have the ship, all tidy and new, and I don't actually know, I haven't checked what happened to it after this, maybe you know. I assume they went back toward the war zone because there's still a lot of war going on. But the end of the war did come, blessedly, particularly for Americans who would have faced a really horrendous task in invading Japan. And Martin left the service, a lot of other people did too. And the Lamson, despite all its wonders, had a rather unhappy ending, although necessary, I suppose. The atomic bomb had ended the war at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and there was a great interest on the part of the services to test it out, see what it would do, figure out who was going to own it and control it within the services, let alone internationally, a whole other question. So these are the bombers flying over Bikini Atoll in summer of 1946, not with a bomb, but with test instruments to check out what was going to happen. They put a barge, I think, right in the middle of this collection of ships, including the Lamson, I think a captured Japanese cruiser, I think the USS Saratoga aircraft carrier, and various other ships in a circle to assess what would happen, how a nuclear bomb would affect a fleet, essentially. And that's a combat artist's version of what happened in Lamson. As it turned out, the ships actually did pretty well when faced with a big nuclear bomb. I mean, a lot of them stayed afloat, despite you might think it would be the end, but no, they just sort of bent up a bit, but not so bad. And this is a contemporary photo of a diver of the wreck down in Bikini Atoll. And this is the Lamson's bell at the recruiting office in Iowa. Lamson was named for a Navy officer from Iowa who did some great heroic deeds in the Civil War, so that's why they get the bell. And that's the book I put together with my son and with the help of some veterans. So that's pretty much the end of my formal presentation. I'd be glad to entertain questions or try to fill in things or share stories, especially if you have any you want to share. If you don't, that's okay too. I get it. But,
like I said, you didn't talk too much over the
yeah, that's the sad thing. But, thank you very much for listening. I've always wanted to share this story, which is why the book is here. I'm just, I guess wars are awful. I don't know if humans will ever learn how to not have wars, but anybody that's been through a war, particularly when they're one of our people, I think deserves to be honored and remembered. I think it's really, really important, and this is my tiny contribution to that act. And so, thank you all.
Thank you.
I can share one last little tidbit about Martin. In his military life, he did not run into Jack Kennedy down in the Solomons, but in 1962, he had had a boat on the Cape, and he had taken a group of folks from Holyoke. I guess they must have been friends, or maybe it was people from the church, because he was very active in the Catholic Church, out to an island not too far from the Kennedy compound. I think they were just there to see the Kennedys, frankly. But some of them were waving. And what should happen, but Jack Kennedy came over in his boat and said, "Are you folks needing rescue?" And Martin said, "No, we're all set. Thank you, sir." So, any case, yeah. Any Navy folks have anything to add? Or It's attractive.
I don't understand why the policy,
The question again, you
Yep.
say that after the ship had all that damage laid off, that she sailed all the way back to Puget Sound.
Yes, we still have one boiler room, I don't know, probably, there was no hull damage, or not much hull damage, it was almost all superstructure. So it was, nominally seaworthy. I think they had a jury-rig steering system directly to the rudder, probably, a backup system, or maybe even mechanical, I don't know.
generally toward the fantail, they would have after steering.
Yes, I think that's what they were doing, because, everything forward was in really rough shape.
Yeah.
But, they weren't going to just scuttle it, they needed a ship, so they sent it back, and people
So
did send it back.
that's a trip. That's 1,000 miles to Guam,
Oh, yeah.
3,000 miles to Hawaii,
More, yeah.
over 2,000 to Seattle.
Exactly, that alone is
What
pretty
kind of
remarkable.
fuel capacity did they have in a damaged ship?
I'm guessing probably a few thousand miles, but they must have been refueled. They probably were in company with something other, or maybe stopped at Pearl or wherever. But yeah, it's a big haul for sure.
The story I was on, we took in 2,000 gallons of fuel. Different tanks all
And
over.
what kind of range did that give you at like cruising speed?
I wouldn't know
Yeah.
that. But there's different tanks all over,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my job on the ship. I was an oil king.
Oh, yeah.
And so I had to take care of all the fuel.
Yeah.
Yeah. The ship I was on was 839 USS Power.
Yeah.
There's a fellow from, a Marine from Worcester, Massachusetts. They have a statue downtown, and he won the Congressional Medal of Honor in Iwo Jima. That's the ship I was on.
Well, speaking of that, I was reading, I'm a World War II junkie, I was reading a book about kind of the origins of the war by Neil Ferguson, who's a Harvard historian, and he talked about, I think a problem for people younger than most people in this room is, and including me to some extent, you grew up in this era where America was number one, we were a growing economy, and we ended up as the only superpower in the world, and it's hard to grasp just how desperate the situation was in World War II. It is entirely possible the Japanese and the Nazi Germans could have prevailed. They had their problems too, but we were in deep trouble in 1942, as were the British and the Russians. So, these people were not just doing it; they were fighting for their lives and for their country at the same time. So it was a very serious situation. All right. Well, thank you. Since it's rainy, snowy out, I will encourage you, or freezing rain, to drive home safely, and I'm happy to talk more, but I don't want to steal time from transportation if that's useful for
Only
you.
across town. I'm reading a very good book now.
Yeah.
It's called 20 Million Tons Under the Sea.
About the American ships, the American subs?
No, about the German subs and the U-505, the one that was captured
right.
intact. There's a
Right.
museum now in,
Yep.
I think, Chicago.
Yep.
Very interesting book. The guy got his material by interviewing and communicating with the crewmen of U-505, including the first skipper. And you talk about how wars could be won and lost. The Germans in 1942 had it within their grasp to end it. But they couldn't get the guys at the top to agree with one another.
Yeah.
And it was all ego.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
And
That's often the case as well.
they weren't going to commit the Air Force to looking out for the submarines, but the submarines were sinking ships left and right. Matter of fact, they have a kind of a way to gauge the success or failure of certain missions. And it's the ratio of ships sunk to submarines lost.
Right.
And those ratios were in the order of 30 or 40 to 1 in early 1941-42. By mid-1944, that ratio went from 40 to 1 to 1 to 2.
Yes. I know, I've read that. It's amazing how...
Yeah, they lost 2 subs for every ship that was sunk. And it's because they didn't believe that airborne radar would ever work.
Yes, they totally underestimated it. That's absolutely true.
Very interesting book. I haven't finished it yet.
Incredible.
from the German point of view,
Radar,
it's
I didn't know what was going on.
really something.
And the two aircraft carriers sunk the other aircraft carriers, but 10 months later, they were in Midway, rather than Midway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You say that